There is no one size fits all or a simple fix when it comes to your well-being. Hi, my name is Josephine, founder of Positivity Center and Wellbeing Consultant, and a person figuring out how to be my best. So join me in conversation with friends, sharing what works for them, and then listen to what works for others so you can create something that will work for you. So hello and welcome to the show today. I am your host, Josephine Tite, and I am joined by my really good friend, Scott Westby. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
It's so good to have you. And we have an interesting relationship because you're usually the one asking me the questions on the other side of the thing. So it's a bit of a role reversal today.
Yeah, that's right. We've done quite a few videos together, and I'm usually the one behind the lens.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll see how this goes.
I know. So I'm a little bit nervous because every time I switch roles, I feel like out of place a little bit. So let's see.
Yeah, I totally am. I'm I get a lot of insight into how other people live their lives and what motivates them, and I'm the one pulling that information out of them. So to be on the other side, and I think it's a great thing ultimately for me to know how that feels like. So
yeah, and how the thought process is and whatnot, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, let's start with sort of like an easy question that'll hopefully an easy question. But when it comes to the world of well-being, I think we all sort of have a different definition of it, or we approach it differently depending on who we are, or what we do or how we live. So what would you maybe say is well-being to you? Like, how would you define it?
For myself or for others, myself. Yeah, it's the perfect first question, and probably I think the hardest to answer, because I think it's something that we don't really think about very often. I don't think we take a step back to actually ask ourselves those questions. And I think especially right now, it's on everybody's mind so much, is what does my well-being look like in the context of everything that's going on in the world, right? And so
that's a really good place to start. Why don't you just start with that? What does your well-being look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's this is every conversation right now. There's just so much difficulty in the world right now, and everyone's kind of having a tough time. And I think we have a lot of those conversations about what is my responsibility during these tough times, for myself and for the world around me. And I think for me, well-being comes from gratitude ultimately. When I remember that I am I'm blessed with white privilege, and living, growing up in a middle class family in Canada, I have it a lot better than a lot of people do. And that helps. I think that helps me put the struggles that I'm having into perspective, and recognizing that I could be struggling financially a lot more than I am. I could be without a job. I could have gotten sick. There's a lot of, and I haven't. All those things have worked out quite well for me, and I'm actually kind of flourishing right now. And so being able to recognize that and go, yeah, it's some things are tough, but not really. Like, I haven't actually experienced real hardship. And I think that is the key, is recognizing that and having that gratitude for the life that we have. And I think that applies to anybody.
Yeah.
Or most people, but
like knowing youth and having been in communication and relationship with you to the best of our abilities over the pandemic, I would say that sometimes I get asked, like, what's the average person experiencing over the pandemic? And I'm like, well, not everybody's languishing and not everybody's flourishing. So there's not this everybody bracket, but right. You definitely have fallen into, from my lens, looking at you living your life, you flourished and still are flourishing. So that's interesting to me. Is it because there was always that perspective taking of it could be worse kind of, I guess, thought pattern? Or what else is happening? Because there's circumstances that you're talking about, and those really, are not up to us. Like, they're not part of what we can control. So how have you moved out of, well, I can't control, that, but I can still do well.
Yeah, I think, a lot of it, frankly, came from, this movement that the world is experiencing right now towards equality and diversity and equity and inclusion. And, I felt for a little while, maybe 8 years ago, that, um, me as a white male was becoming, was under attack ultimately. And that, I've since totally changed my position on that. That's absolutely not true. And, one of my favorite quotes is, when you come from a place of privilege, equality feels like oppression.
Feels like oppression.
Feels like oppression. Yeah. Because you
Uh,
feel like you're being brought down and it's oppressing you, but really that's the experience that everyone is having. And so I've really started to recognize what white privilege is, and what that feels like, and how much of it I have. So it's not something that I've always had, but it's certainly something that I had before COVID hit. And I had a lot of anger about in 2016 for various reasons, and through 2017 and all the way through 2020. There was a lot that I was upset about, and I felt that, a lot of it was just addiction to news and social media, and companies whose job it is to sell advertising and to sell your attention. And so they favor stories and algorithms and things that get you upset. And it took a lot of time for me to pull myself out of that, and to realize the patterns that I was involved in, and to
okay.
shut that off. And I still haven't done it completely.
Yeah.
But recognizing that is a lot of the source of, unhappiness in my life is I'll read a story about something Trump said, from 20 different angles and all the different hot takes on it, and it's just not productive, and it's not healthy, I don't think.
Well, I know my teacher from my positive psychology diploma, she does not watch the news. Because she said, it's not that you can't watch the news, and it's not that the news isn't important. But if you're watching something and there's no proactive or positive action you're going to take from it, then why are you watching it? Yes. Right. So I think that's a good angle to, because for me, I watched a lot of sad news around the senior sector
Right.
right. And that was really hard stuff, but that was okay for me because I wanted to make a change in that space. So, I was still proactively thinking or writing or connecting or creating programs to help overcome.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, when it comes to consuming news, it has such a negativity bias, because we have a negativity bias as people. And there's just so much doom and gloom right now. And it's important. And my wife has actually started doing this, to go actively seek positive news stories.
Oh, very cool.
Right. Specifically, right now it's, climate change is a huge story. And so, we're finding things that the world is doing to fight climate change, and, and how companies are pivoting, and new energy sources that are coming out, and just trying to actively fight that negativity bias, and recognize that, yes, it is important to stay informed, but going out and actively searching for some of that information yourself, and trying to find those stories.
Yeah. Like highlight the solution and less of the problem, because we all know what the problem is.
Yeah, exactly. And if we continue to just focus on, we're all toast, it's just not a good way to live.
Yeah. So it's interesting just hearing you talk about a lot of outside perspectives and seeing, oh goodness. Anyway, when you talk a lot about all the outside perspectives, you see a lot of different perspectives, and you're able to look at that and go, okay, what's the positive side of things? What's the solution-based side of things? Which is kind of, for me, I'm hearing a lot of optimism and some gratitude too.
Yeah.
So are you conscious of that? And do you do that not just in looking at the world's situations, but Scott's situation, like Scott's life?
I no, not really. I'm blessed to have people in my life who recognize those patterns in me, and have the courage to call me out on those patterns, and I would say it's becoming more of a conscious choice for me, but
Hmm.
my father-in-law was the one who called me out on how angry I was all the time, maybe
Oh,
3 or 4 years
interesting.
ago. Right. And
So the
and
perspective that you kind of were sharing with me right now about how you're looking at the world wasn't always how you look at your own life.
no, I think looking at my own life is a different thing than how I look at the world.
Okay.
When I look at my own life, I've never I'm just a hopeless optimist, and I always have been. Um, and I think that's really all there is to it.
Mhm.
When I was, I had a lot of apathy when I was 17 and 18, and I was never really anxious about what I was gonna, do and be when I grew up. I was blessed to know that I wanted to make movies, so I never really had any sort of like who am I identity crises, in my as a young adult. I had this focus and this passion that I was able to put my energy towards.
Mm.
I met my wife when I was 18, and so I was never struggling to find companionship or exist in the dating world. Like the dating world is a completely foreign and terrifying world to me, and I've never really had to experience that. So, again, it's about that gratitude, but also I think that knowing who you are,
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
it's just been something that I'm blessed with.
Well, I think that when I reflect too, if I were to define positive psychology, my very first definition was always it's about who you are and what you can do to live your best life. And the who you are piece was so essential. It had to come before the what you do.
Mm,
So when you've got the identity piece intact, and whether it's rigid or fluid or what doesn't really matter. What matters is you get you,
right.
right? And so I
Yeah.
get a sense from you that you really get who you are and you got who you were from quite a young age.
Yeah, I think and that's an ongoing thing. I've
Sure.
I've changed since I was 17 and 18, and my priorities have changed, and how I view the world has changed. But I've just always kind of been naturally a confident person.
Yeah, it's that confidence that is just
Yeah.
carried forward from decade to decade or from,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
And I think, I've certainly in the past 2 or 3 years, I've settled into who I am a bit more. Like I used to, I was a young filmmaker, and there's a very real and very, I think, important philosophy of fake it till you make it when you're that age, right? And of just putting on that face, even if you might not have all the expertise.
Mm,
And as I get older, and I do have more of that expertise, and that I think it's more of a deep level of confidence
yeah.
that I'm sinking into more. And I used to, like, when we started this company, this video company, I used to wear suits all the time. And now I wear t-shirts, right? And I think there's something in that.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to pause and maybe go deeper into that little aspect of the fake it till you make it,
Mhm.
especially in an industry that there's a lot of eyes on you and possibly a lot of expectations, or, maybe you can tell us what that experience has been like for you and how you found yourself in that.
Oh, that is something I've never thought about.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, it's show business,
Right?
right? And people expect that from you, I think. And it's interesting how, I guess, there's a difference between, video production and narrative filmmaking. And when you're in a creative field, more like narrative filmmaking, you have to make really intense personal connections with people really quickly. And then those go away. You finish your project and that's it. And when you're in more of like a video production, like a, corporate and commercial production, it's more like a business relationship.
Mm.
And so there's two sides to that, and they're very different. But I think faking it till you make it, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know.
Well, there, like, the reason why it kind of intrigued me was because there's, I guess, a lot of different perspectives when you start talking about, the experience of faking it till you make it and whether or not it's healthy for somebody to do
Yeah.
so. And I tend to believe that there are pluses and minuses with everything. So I think there is an element of being too fake to yourself to make it that you don't come out the other side authentic. But in my conversation and hearing you so far, you did some fake it till you make it, but you came out on the other side knowing who you were and being more true and authentic to yourself.
Right.
So that's why I'm just like, what was that process for you like? And how were you aware of possibly how much faking it you were doing versus how much of, you finding you was happening in that process?
I think it was a mixture. I was totally conscious that I was doing that.
Yeah.
And my business partner at the time, Matt, he and I were the same. We had those same philosophies, right? We were able to put on these masks and come across as very professional and knowledgeable. And not to say we didn't know what we were doing, but that I think that aspect of confidence goes a long way when you're starting a business, right? Is that belief in yourself, even though the film industry and most industries are rife with imposter syndrome, right? which is I think a forever thing. But I think authenticity, you hit it right on the head there, is that that happened to me about 3 years ago when I directed my first movie, where I learned that bringing, or at least being willing to discover more of who I was authentically was important. Because when you're directing a movie, you have to put everything you are into it. All of your life experiences, it's incredible how much it challenges you and tests you. And so I discovered that the more authentic I was for myself, the more successful I was in communicating what I wanted. And I would dig up a story from my childhood that I would communicate to an actor to help create that, that intimate, quick connection, like I talked about, and help set the tone for a scene. And then after that, it was like, what, I think that I like myself. And I think that the more I can take that mask off, the more authentic I'll come across. And I think ultimately, especially in a creative field, that's kind of everything, right? And I think that as you start with that fake it till you make it, and then as you start, or I guess you need to fake it less, that authenticity starts to take over. And for me, that journey was about 10 years long. And so I think to me, it was a nice balance, and I'm not sure it would work for everybody. And there are people who are far more authentic than I am right at the gate. And I'm jealous of those people. Yeah.
Or inspired.
Yeah. Envious, say that.
Yeah, it's that optimist side of you. That's something that I don't have as like a natural tendency. It's
optimism.
Yeah. It's a worked thing. Like, it's got to be intentional. It's got to be practiced. I have to ask myself those questions. What makes this moment perfect? Because it just doesn't come to me just in the moment, right? And then I think I was reading a book this year, and it was talking about how the universe is basically always conspiring for you. And that was really helpful, because that's really a belief. And if you have that belief, then it's a little bit easier to just see it without having to really think it through before it shows up. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way, but I've always kind of thought that it was always going to work out for me.
Yeah.
And I've told people since the beginning of my professional career that I get lucky all the time.
And you say it, and then it happens.
And it totally happens. Yeah. And it's like people, I remember when I was working in real estate marketing for a couple of years, we were launching this new community. We were having this big event on Saturday to launch the show homes, and the forecast was terrible. It was like, it was going to pour rain. It was like the middle of July. It was one of those July rainstorms. And I said, it's not going to happen. Trust me. This is my first major community launch, and I get lucky, and it's going to be fine. And it totally was. 2 days before, the forecast turned right around, and it was beautiful, and tons of people came out. And I totally take credit for that.
Well, when we were doing a project, you said the film gods were on our side.
The film gods are always on my side. It's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. It was we were outside a lot, and we were lucky. Absolutely. So that's been, and this is what, I don't know if you see this, but to me, what I hear when you say that is there's a mindset, there's a belief or a philosophy that guides your thinking process, that therefore then guides your actions.
I think so. Yeah. And I think it's self-fulfilling and it's a bit of a feedback loop.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not always, I'm not always optimistic and life isn't always great. There are definitely struggles, but um, yeah, I think that belief that everything's going to be fine um, probably comes from being naive, maybe on purpose.
Mm.
Um, but I think it's also a habit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that reminds me of that book called Atomic Habits, and some of them are just, they're not things you do. And I think, when I begin many conversations about well-being that works, it's like, well, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do? And it's more than that. How do you think? How do you approach it? To me, that's what I'm seeing in you, is this, there's these habits that have formed neurologically, and they're just there. It's like, because it's been described like it's a riverbed, and inside that riverbed, it's hard to change it. So if you're pessimistic, or often more pessimistic, it's more work to create the optimistic channels, that flow through your brain. But when you've got an optimistic channel flowing through there will be an off day, there'll be a detour, there absolutely, and it's okay, and you'll come back, because the main river path is there, and it's been carved for so many years. So
Yeah, it's a totally correct point. I think, yeah, it becomes who you are, right? And our
yes.
and our thoughts shape our behaviors, and our behaviors shape our attitudes, and it just
Yeah,
is self-fulfilling in that way.
yeah, in many ways it is. Yeah.
And I think there are kind of two ways to approach those things, and what part of it is, I think it all relates to nihilism right now. Everyone's wondering, like, it doesn't matter, right? Everyone's kind of thinking like, who cares? None of this really matters. And um, there's kind of two ways to look at that. And one is it doesn't matter and we're all doomed, so who cares about anything? And I think it doesn't matter and we're all doomed, so why worry?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's kind of it's two sides of the same coin.
It's so true.
And
I struggle with that, absolutely, and been struggling with that probably through, well, definitely the last year and a half. And I'm always thinking like the worst is coming, and there's going to be famines and floods and infestations. And I had to stop myself because it was preventing me from living.
I
Like,
still feel those things. Like,
yeah, for sure.
there was a study out of the UK last week that insects are down 60% in the UK, flying insects from
Oh,
2004. And that's like, we're in the middle of the sixth great extinction on Earth.
interesting.
And so you can look at that and go and just be so depressed by, I think, news like that.
I mean, we all knew, you can kind of bring it back to just a life cycle. We're all born, we all die. So, mankind, humankind, we're all going to be here at one point, and we're all going to not be here at one point. There's got to be an end. There's been, I think, I don't know for sure, but you'd think there's going to be an end. So, yeah, and my philosophy on that is, quality over quantity. I'd rather choose to live a quality day than worry about how many more days I'm going to live with less quality to them.
I think you're totally right. I think death is on everyone's minds a lot lately,
Yeah.
at least in my world. And yeah, we talk about trying to find that balance between knowing that you're going to die versus fearing that you're going to die, right? And so it's like trying to, seize the day and carpe diem, and know that. And I think as I get older, certainly, I mean, I'm only in my mid 30s, but you start to recognize the passage of time. And as you start to see a new generation come up, it feels more real, and you start to recognize that life is finite.
Yes.
And that's what midlife crises are born of, and that's where that all comes from. But
Yeah. And
yeah,
there's literature on that too, Scott. Like, they actually, in the literature, it's called death anxiety. And the more of a higher fear you have of death, the less of a life satisfaction you actually have.
right.
So they show as a correlate.
Yeah.
So,
Something that's helped me a lot with that is I had a thought a while ago that I was dead in the 1300s
Hmm.
and in the 800s and a million years ago. Just like I'll be dead in 1,000 years, maybe. And when you look at, I'm not afraid of the 1400s, even though I wasn't alive then. So why would I be afraid of the year 2600?
Yeah.
Right? Like, so I think that, we don't know what consciousness is right now. And I know you and I have different views on religion and stuff, but I think there's really nothing to be scared of.
No, I don't think there's anything to be scared of. I actually had a really intimate moment with my mom when we were in Mexico. We were the sun was going down. We were laying on one of those beds by the pools, and the wind had picked up. So we were like sharing a sweater. So we were like really cuddled in close together. And she just said, one day I won't be here. And then she added, and one day you won't be here either. And I'm like, yeah.
Mhm.
And it's all going to be okay. So what a morbid topic to talk about, but it just feels so actually, really, I feel like it feels freeing to have that perspective on our own mortality.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it traps you. I feel like it literally traps you.
Yeah, and I think we're all still trapped in it. Like, I have these philosophies, but that doesn't mean I don't think about it, right? And I don't have these conversations all the time. Like,
it's like imposter syndrome. It never really fully goes away.
yeah,
And it's like optimism. You don't have a perfect life 365 where every day is optimistic. There's still always going to be moments and days and circumstances and situations that are, just take you off course. Just like if you've got a goal to go to a destination, there's just more than one way to get there. So sometimes you have to take a detour.
and I think those detours are really important.
Hey,
I think what a good example for me is that I am extremely focused when I'm working, and I don't just mean like on the day. I mean over the course of 6 months. And you don't realize that the course of your life is slowly turning.
hmm.
Say yes to different projects and just get buried in the nitty gritty of day-to-day stuff. And so we'll go on vacation, once or twice a year, and after the first week, I start freaking out. And my wife pointed this pattern out to me a couple of years ago. Is after a week I start panicking, like, oh my God, I'm not currently making a movie right now, or I'm not thinking about past successes. I'm thinking about future problems, and I'm not who I thought I was going to be. And then she spends a couple of days calming me down and centering me again. And then the second week is all about when I get back, things are going to be different. And usually I make, real meaningful change to kind of, like I said, we're slowly changing just to bump it back that way. And then, and I think it's really healthy.
Yeah.
To do that. I think we really need to do that. And the biggest part about that is just getting away. Whether it's physical or emotional or whatever, it's just stepping out of.
Yeah, and being somebody who's so zeroed in on their career, which you are, and I've seen you get into that space even just from a distance, and you somehow, like, how do you work that in, that you remember the vacations, you remember to schedule in? Is it intentional, or is it just, did you find a rhythm that was working for you, so you just do it now? What's that?
Like scheduling vacations?
Well, because that's part of, if you're so zeroed in on your career, you could keep going off and never realize,
Yeah.
right? Like, so you could keep doing this and then never realize, but it's like your vacation, or time with parents, or whatever you're doing recreationally and leisure with your leisure time is helping you get back, right? So is it intentional, or like, did you just find
I mean, it is now. Yeah. When Briar and I started dating, I said I wanted to make movies, and she said she wanted to travel. And so we went on, we spent a month in China when we were kids, basically. And we went backpacking through Europe about 12 years ago. In 2015, we spent 6 weeks in Southeast Asia. And I had these, epiphanies every time, right? And so, and you start to notice that pattern. And it was, like I said, a couple of vacations ago where Brian was like, you do this every time. And so now it's a little bit intentional, right? Where it's like, okay, let's just be ready that this is going to happen. And
This is going to happen. Yeah.
yeah, everything's cool. But it's also cool because I start to think about that happening and I preempt it, right? And so I'm able to put myself in that position of stepping back from my daily life and just things broader.
And it sounds like, I mean, you talked about being angry and your father-in-law, making you more aware of that. And then you talk about just having these panic moments of veering off track and your wife kind of helping you see what was happening. Do you see it as your social supports most often pointing out to you what's happening so you can redirect?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why, I kicked this conversation off with the fact that I have people in my life who are courageous enough to tell me those things, and who have the emotional intelligence to recognize that that's happening to someone who isn't them, right? Like what an amazing gift.
No kidding, right?
Yeah.
And also to be like receptive of it, because if you weren't receptive, I'm sure you wouldn't get feedback over and over again.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first time you hear it, I'm not, like I think, I had to be told a couple of times, like you're angry all the time now, like why? And I knew I was, and I would say, well, here's why. I'm passionate about justice and all these things that are happening to other people. And I think it's okay to be passionate about that stuff. But when it's really just when you start to recognize that I'm just going on Twitter because I'm looking to get mad.
Right.
Looking for that dopamine hit and that rage, and then I just close Twitter and I don't do anything about it, and it just stew.
So true. Well, we need to be fed because it's a bit of us being validated, I think, sometimes. So we can use those external stories and not realize that they are simultaneously creating something that's probably not the best for us or the people around us, but they are validating us. We create these silos and yeah. Well, so good to have. I love that you share that at the beginning and kind of you're sharing it at the end. And to me, that's always what it's been about. And that's what the show is really about too, because it's for me to put out in the world, but it's also for me because I know that I need community with people and I love having conversations around anything well-being related. And then it gets to be a gift for people in the world. So it's important. It's funny. I actually recorded another show today and that was sort of the theme of it too, is like community. It's so essential. It is the most essential piece. And, in your experience, it's been somebody, being beside you and sticking with you, until you can see what they see. And you did, and you have, and that'll probably happen again.
Oh, I'm sure it will. Yeah. Well, I mean, we're social creatures, right? Like that's what people are. So that makes sense to me. Yeah, but that would be.
Well, would there be any like a remainder, just one last piece of advice you might want to give someone just from your life experience and how they can move forward, nourishing and taking care of themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's tough. It's so hard right now. For me, I feel like I'm a little bit of a chameleon in a way. Like I take on attributes of people that I spend a lot of time around. Like I know that I'll adopt a laugh. If I spend a lot of time with someone, I catch myself laughing like them. And I am, with my job, I spend a lot of time interviewing people for videos, right? And so the goal of that is to get to the emotional center of someone's life and motivation as quickly as you can. And that always starts with a why question, right? Like, why do you think your life has gone this way? Or why do you think you've been so successful? Or why does your company do this? And because that is the heart of a story. And the more I grow as a storyteller, and the more that I realize that everything I'm doing is always about storytelling, the more I realize that storytelling is really all that matters. And it's I think what separates people from animals is storytelling, and it's the way we pass on knowledge and the way we figure out how to be people. And that's the power of it. And I think the more stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, those shape who we are. And so you don't have to know who you are to tell your own story. But I think if you start telling, or just thinking about your life as a story, what is that why at the center of it? And how are you acting on that why in your own life? And what are you doing that expresses those things? And you start to understand that your actions are informed by who you are, but they also define who you are.
Yes.
And so, and it's just that, it's taking that critical distance from your own lived experience and looking at it as a story. And that helps us put who we are in a bit of a box, which helps us identify who we are.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And I think if you can start to recognize patterns, like, hey, the theme of my life so far is this. And if that doesn't make you happy, I think we can, like we talked about, start adopting behavior, change those attitudes.
So creating and recreating and massaging the story until it's a story that serves you.
Yeah, and until it's a story that feels true, right? I think
That's
we all
true.
have, and I think that's how we take control of the story of our lives, is by changing the centers.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's so great. I love it. Thank you for all of the great questions. At the end there, I'm like, I'm writing those down, going to apply those. And yeah, it is a story. And I keep thinking about just hearing you say that and knowing how passionate you are about story. And I remember first meeting you and thinking like, oh, I've always said I wasn't a good storyteller. But there is story.
Oh, you're muted.
Whoops. I thought I heard somebody coming up. So yeah, there are stories in me, and now I'm like diving into those stories a little bit more, and it's amazing how they get to the heart of me, like, and the heart of the message I want to have available for the world. So yeah, I
think some of that, there's main character syndrome, where people believe that they are the main character on Earth and everyone around them is right? Background performers. And I think if we start to recognize that we're not the main character, that we can start to see our stories a little bit objectively.
Yeah, so true. So we are a story, and we are not the star of the story. We are part of the, what's the word? The
broader social
crew, the whole crew.
Yeah, the whole.
Yeah, the cast. We are part of the cast and crew. Right. Yeah, and having been in a project with you, I can see how, like, sometimes it does look like the person on the camera is the star of the story, but I can attest to the fact that I never ever felt like it was just me, and nor did I ever feel like I could do it on my own. It's always a collaborative effort.
Totally. And I think the more time I spend behind the lens, I'm asking people to tell their stories, but when I go and edit that footage, I realize that I am the one telling that story. And the storyteller becomes as important a character as the character themselves, right? And so I think that helps give some perspective.
Thanks for listening to Wellbeing That Works. Before you go, take 1 minute to write down your takeaway from today's guest. And be sure to download our Wellbeing Evaluation Sheet to help you along your wellbeing journey. And if you've got something to share to inspire others, be sure to be a guest on our show. Until next time, with love and kindness.